Okay, guys, this is Simon with Trading Perform Coaching. We are covering a homework session for the members of the room, and basically using the journal, walking through. So, it's easy to talk about. The majority of the time, we end up with winning trades across the board, right? There's some stops, but it's pretty rare for us to actually get days where either my read is off, or even with news, I can usually catch it. So on the occasion where I do catch a stop, or two stops specifically in the market, I want to go back through and retrace my footsteps, and I want to look at each step of the process that I went through to find out the first of all, I want to process my feelings on it. Why? I don't want to turn my feelings of anxiety or agitation. So that second CL trade swung me from a profit on the day to a loss on the day, right? Number one. Number two, I don't want to turn it into overtrading. Number three, I personally get anxiety that I've somehow lost the ability to properly read the market, right? I get it. Did I just misread the chart? Did I go through it too fast? Did I not have a good, whatever it might be. So in order to allay that, the first thing, there's a couple steps I follow, right? So first, let's bring up the chart and go through what the steps were. So the first thing I want to do is if I had an immediate response, usually that response will be that I've gotten frustrated with the stops and I've overtraded, right? Secondly, there's usually a factor of randomness in it, like I'll take one zone and won't take another zone. And then third, I might have missed the news, which we all did. I asked repeatedly. There was news on this push down, and I just didn't catch it. It didn't come across any service that I had. So number one, let's start off in the morning. This zone hit at around 5:30 a.m., right? The top of the zone held. You can easily argue, even though it didn't take a 10-tick stop, that I took the trade when we were right in here. And my thought process is, well, we've consolidated, we push out, right? So this was step number one. Let's circle this here. This was step number one. What was my thinking process here? Well, we've been one time into the upside, right? I figured we're going to consolidate and we'll come back up and test for 50.41. It's the day before. It's the day before inventory, and they'll continue the squeeze. And what I didn't account for was this wasn't even really the second test. Really, had I been in this trade from this point, meaning the first time in, really I would have been using this backside test as an opportunity to get out, right? I clearly had already been in from about 5:30, 5:45 in the morning till 8 o'clock. That's 3 hours, way longer than I normally would have been in. So that goes down in my journal as mistake number one, right? And the mistake was specifically that I had envisioned in my head that we were going to have a short squeeze, and I turned that from a possibility into what was going to happen. So I didn't go, oh, we've sat here for 3 hours. This really isn't even the second touch. We've never been able to get out of the zone. That was mistake number one, and it resulted in a stop 10 ticks behind, and I got stopped. So I respected my stop. It was no big deal. I went on with the rest of my trades, and I traded really well. But I was agitated here too. And so because I was agitated, and I turned this zone, when I went back and looked at it, I said, this really isn't a white zone, it's a yellow zone. Yellow zone means it's pretty much good for the first touch, right? And sure enough, it worked on the first touch, but I went off plan. So I started off plan here. I went off plan here. I did not take this trade. So now without even having the intention or recognizing it, right, I am off plan. Before I continue, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interject this really quick because I forgot to do it. You know what? I'll put it in, but just so everyone know, this is for educational purposes only. Past performance is not indicative of future results. I'll put in the disclaimer. I have it recorded. I'll splice it in. So at this point, right, what's happened? I've taken a trade, and it was so innocent, right? I really looked at it and I said, well, we're in the zone. I should take it, right? And it was an attempt to stay on plan, but I didn't think it all the way through, and I was doing the market preview. And really what I want when I draw it through is what I'd like is for it to do just like it did with the yellow zone. So let's erase this. What I would like my zones to look like is either on first or second touch that there's some distance traveled and stretched into the trade location, right? So had I I want to go back to how I would have done the day perfectly, right? To replay it in my mind, because really the question becomes, was this a bad day because all the zones busted, or was this a bad day because I misexecuted? And it was a combination of it was more of number one than it was of number two, right? So had I followed my process, I'd have been long right here at 49.47. I'd have gotten my 10 ticks and maybe 20 ticks. Did it give us, let's see what our swing high was. $70, so 47, so 57 and 67 paid. So that was 10 up and then 20 up were achieved. If you moved your stop to break even, you only got 10, but that doesn't matter. That's a matter of personal execution style, right? The fact of the matter is you got 10 ticks off the top of this zone, and this trade should not have been taken for me, right? And then the plan was and then it's interesting because Bill, who's in the room, asked me, he goes, well, Simon, he goes, are you going to take the backside test of the white zone here? And I said, no, I'm not, right? Because I still had the idea that, because I'm already agitated at this point, I already know I've made a mistake, and that's the reason why I didn't. But then at the spur of the moment, right, so I lost somewhat of awareness, right? And the reason why that makes a difference is, let's say I just took the 10, stop was moved to break even, I only got 10 ticks here. I'm still up on the day instead of a full stop on full size over here, right? So my perspective is very different. I now get stopped here, and I would still, because of the size of the 10 ticks behind the back of the zone, I would still be down on the day, but only ever so slightly. And let me tell you why that would have made a huge difference, okay? Because on this trade, I would have ended up with long profit, stop, right? But now I have a 1 and 1, and I take my third trade into the zone. And from this 48.71, we rotate up to 48.83, which means I get another 10 ticks. And then it matters again. If I move my stop to break even, I have 10 and done. And between these two trades, I've covered the majority of the loss here, right? But so the first thing that tells me is if I'd followed my process, I wasn't clear enough on my process mentally how I wanted to execute. If I followed my process, I'm still having a down day, but it's a minor down day. I'm actually having I'd call it a substantial down. I have 2 stops, enough to cause damage, right? And it was enough to trigger some anxiety and for me to go back and do a full kind of autopsy on the process, right? Okay, so now we know that if I had followed my process correctly, so the day started with me not following process correctly. Had I done that, I'd be closer to flat on the day. And why is that important? That's important because I nailed NQ out of the gate, right, out of the white zone, following the same process. I nailed ES, and even though it didn't give me my 2 points, I'm out break even. So if CL is flat, I'm still having a pretty nice day just with NQ alone, right? So now we come back over, and then, so that's done, right? I don't have any more damage or anything else. But now I'm sitting here and I'm going through and I'm like, well, God, did I totally miss the white zones? That's the next question. So we have our answer to that, right? When a zone holds for 2 hours, that zone worked, right? This zone worked. This zone worked, right? According to our own internal parameters for scale, right? This zone worked. This zone busted, right? So call that red. This zone busted. So out of 1, 2, 3, 4, one zone busted. One zone got you somewhere from slightly down to break even, right? And one zone, and then the 2 other zones got you profitable, right? So now I'm left with this question, because remember, until I went to lunch, I didn't realize that Saudi Arabia was the drill count from Saudi Arabia was up, or some stupidity like that, right? Whatever it was some blah 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 news, right? So now I got to go back and figure out, well, were the zones valid or not? So how do we figure that out? This is why taking the pause after you get stopped, slowing your roll down a little bit, is really, really, really critical, right? Because it lets you stop and watch. And I want to show you a mistake that could have easily happened. I then said I would not want to short the white zone once we got underneath it over here and it busted. I said I would not want to short it. Why? There's not enough stretch, right? But what did the market do It clearly got below the white zone. So then the question becomes, from observation without needing anything from those zones, right? So we pushed up into the back side of the zone. We already know that zone worked from the top side, and now it worked from the back side. It rejected down. I don't know if the rejection down was worth 10 ticks. Let's see. It was not worth 10 ticks. But nonetheless, it rejected down, and it held the market in place pretty much for almost 45 minutes, which is a long time on CL, right? Then the market rotated up. It rotated exactly to the bottom of the zone that busted, 48.96. Remember what I said yesterday? When a zone busts, as we had an example on NQ, right? So I'll give you the example on NQ. Let's open that up really quick. That was 0731, right? Yeah. Okay, this is NQ from yesterday. And I put there blown support. That was a former white zone that it got blasted through, just like CL did, right? And I said blown support, high potential for initial rejection out of this location. I really messed up this trade yesterday, right? And it actually, so what I took out of this was I need to have a way of coloring these blown support zones a different color when they get retested, because the odds of a rejection are very high, right? So if I had not had my two stops back to back, right, and I come back up to this location over here. So now let's go back over to, that's today's chart. Let's go back over to today, right? So if I wait patiently, I know this is the zone that's blown out. So I know that if I follow my process, so realize what I'm doing. I'm calming myself down, right? I'm getting myself recentered. Okay, so my stop's bad, but it's less than 1/2 my average up day is my total down day today, right? So totally recoverable. It would have been recoverable here, quite frankly, okay? But I needed to pause and stop and watch, right? Because what I want to do is my mind, okay, so your intention, your mind, and your trade plan have to all align in order to execute at a high level, right? If I am scared, which I was, right? If I'm scared that my zones aren't going to work, I cannot put on a leveraged position in confidence and hold through the wiggles to get to target. I just simply can't. And I have found even when I cut trade size, right, that I can't do it. That even though my intention is, oh, we're going to go from white zone to white zone there, my fear overrides my ability to execute. So my primary objective here is to find out now. So we've discovered I didn't follow my trade plan or didn't execute it at a high level, right? Number two, we found out that there was news involved that none of us were able to find while the news was actually out, right? And then number three, was I right to pause, or should have I continued to press and press with size, right? So the answer is because I lost my confidence a little bit, right? Or at least like my anxiety levels had risen to the point, and I already know that I'm having difficulty executing before I had any issues. Why will I want to continue pressing? So the next thing I want to discover is, did I do the zones right or wrong, right? Were they held under normal circumstances? So I can observe without having to have a result that the first time up into the white zone gave me a rotation from 48.96 right down to 48.71, and from 48.71 gave me a rotation right back to 48.96. Now, that's exactly how the white zones are supposed to work, right? And what that tells me is if it hadn't been for a news environment and had I executed on a high level, that odds are, even if I had gotten, so if I go back and rework my day now, the day would have worked out like this. No trade, long for 10 or 20 ticks, right, depending on how I handle my stop situation. Stopped, long for 10 ticks, hopefully stopped on balance or stopped at break even, one of the two, right? No short, not enough rotation. Short, full size, right? And the money that I would have lost here would have been refunded here, and then hopefully either covered and or probably a little bit of fantasy land, because it takes a lot to short and then flip and cover that, especially when your impulse move is so big here. But in fantasy land, at least, short here and cover 48.71 and flip and get long, right? And then recognizing, again, the last piece, going into pick close is one of the most volatile times of the day, and yet another example of why you don't want to put on a position anywhere between 1 and 1:30 afternoon, because these squeezes happen consistently. They're relatively unpredictable unless you know which way the volume is going to go at the close, right? So now I know several things. I didn't do a horrible job on the zones. I need to sit down and work through before I get here, right? I need to pay extra attention to how I'm executing CL at the zone and make sure I have some kind of rotation into that zone so that I have a good chance of getting a counter rotation, right? I need to be able to prepare to take my trade in sequence, right? From the proper setup, meaning this is proper, this is not proper. And then what would have ended up happening is if I had done this sequence right here, this 48.96, take 10 ticks, leave the trailer, I would have gotten my 10 and 20. My very last trailer might have gotten stopped, but I would have gotten my 10 and 20, right? And now, combined with the ES, the way I handled ES and the way I handled NQ, I am, not only am I up from NQ, I would have ended up positive on the day on CL, right? But because I got my footwork backwards on the way that I executed, right? I know, and the cool thing about that is, now instead of me worrying about did I do the zones right? Do I have to panic? Is it the end of the world? I know that when I come back and trade on Thursday or an hour after the numbers on Friday, on Tuesday, wherever I choose to trade next, right? That my edge is still intact. I'm no longer anxious about the zones because I know the zones weren't the problem. I was the problem, right? I started with a misexecution and I got behind the 8 ball all day long on this trade, both in trades I didn't take and in trades I did take. I was behind the 8 ball all the way through and through, right? And now I know I can come back tomorrow with confidence, both in ES, NQ, CL, and the bonds, right? Because when I go through and look at how I made my other decisions, we already covered NQ and ES. So let me show you, I did have my head on straight with, and by the way, it's too late in the day for me to short this bond move. FYI, it's just way too late. I won't take it this late in the afternoon. It tends to just die and go sideways. So watch it be a nice 10 or 20 tick trade, but I'm not trading this, right? So I want to point something out. Randy, this is not in any way a criticism of you at all if you're listening, right? But when you get emotional about your trade, so I marked this zone green yesterday, and when I marked it green, here, I'll get my notes. And I wrote the 30-year has a green zone. I have two choices. I can trade the green zone. I can trade the green zone or not. What has been my past experience? Then I wrote past experience of green zone. It tends to get traded through easily, and even if it works, it tends to be hard to get it to work consistently day in, day out. It's not a prominent location. Don't take the trade, right? Now, in this particular case, right, so I want to show you, if I hadn't gone through in my notes and written that down, when Randy pointed out, hey, it's the backside test of the green zone, right? But I'd already written down in my planning, right? I'd already written out in my planning that I wasn't going to take the green zone for a trade, either direction. I wasn't going to trade the green zone for a trade, right? So when Randy said that, now had I been under pressure and I've been going, should I trade it or should I not trade it? When you're doing that in your head and you're trying to figure out, and then someone says, hey, so understand, Randy typed a message to me. That's all he did, right? And he goes, hey, coming up on a backside test of the green zone, right? So my response was almost immediate to Randy. I said, hey, Randy, that's a green zone. I'm not trading it. The reason I was clear on that is because I got clear yesterday. It doesn't matter when you got clear on it, but when I made the zone, I wrote my notes. I was clear. I wasn't going to trade it, right? It wasn't a question for me. I wasn't uncertain of it. I pretty much decided I wasn't trading the green zone, right? So when Randy's, now imagine the other way around. I'm unsure if I'm going to trade the green zone. Maybe if it looks right at the time, maybe if it looks right, I'll trade the green zone, right? And then Randy types me a message. Hey, we're coming up on the backside of the green zone. Now, I'm under pressure. So in my head, right, everyone's different, but in my head it doesn't come up as, hey, there's the green zone, we're coming up on a backside test. That's all the information he gave me. In my head, right, because everyone's different, remember I'm ADD, I'm dyslexic, and my mind jumps to conclusions very quickly if I don't purposely slow it down, right? So in my mind, what that type message sounds like is, hey, we're coming up on the green zone, and then my mind adds, this is probably a fantastic opportunity for a trade. Take the short. Right now, Randy didn't add that part, right? I did. Okay, my own mind added that part of the trade. Okay, and I know for a fact that happens to some of y'all out there, is that you add that part of the process, right? When all the information, and this happens with me, Brian, constantly. I used to jump on Brian. Brian would go like, he said it this morning, we're coming up on a backside test of the yellow zone. Well, I told him I wasn't taking the yellow zone because I was so agitated by what I did in the white zone, right? When it was actually the right trade. So the point behind that is you should be able to look at this, and when I say ahead of time, right, know where you're going to take the trades. I know I'm not going to take my own green zones. They're admittedly the weakest zones I can come up with. They're there. They clearly provided resistance overnight, and it clearly got busted during the day when there was a lot of volume, and that's what my concern was, right? I already had my plan. But there's two steps to that. What I didn't, so now go back to crude. I had the white zone. My plan was to take it from the type of the white zone, but what I did was I short-circuited my own planning by going, well, it's in the white zone. It's probably going to come out of it, right? When the next step that I have to add to that process is, what does it look like when it works? Well, we now have a beautiful example of what it looks like when it works. When the zones work, they get a stretch down into them, they pop off the top of that zone, and they go, right? Maybe sometimes from the back, sometimes from the front. We know that sometimes, especially if there's news, they can get driven through, right? And now we also know that if we keep taking our trading sequence, we most likely get rewarded, right? Because we know that from having a bunch of days of trading the zones, right? And then lastly, if things do go wrong, now you have a model for slowing down and looking and going, okay, well, what is this going to look like when it works correctly, right? And now you know. So now we know that the zones were done correctly on CL. We have the evidence of it. Really only one zone busted in one direction. I was off in sequence, right? I had a trade plan beforehand of exactly what I was going to take. Green zones I will not be taking. I can just tell you all ahead of time. The green zone's there so you understand why the price action that occurs in that area is occurring. But understand, they can get passed through easily, and whatever I'm using to create that zone, for whatever reason I've chosen to put a zone, there's some substance there, but there's not enough substance for me to throw my cash on the table, right? And then lastly, the last piece that had I not gotten chopped up in all this, even though I did not have a zone here, I would have gotten paid big time right here and beautifully, right? This is the only two trades I needed that came at the end of the day, and even just this one trade from 96 to 71 would have made my day. So now we've gone full circle. We've identified what the problem was, right? We've identified that our methodology for creating the zones is still solid and works well, right? And we can come back tomorrow, and instead of being shaky about, oh, what if it goes bad, now I'm back on process, right? And I can start mowing down my trades piece by piece. So at any rate, I'm done. That's the coaching session. You want to mark those things down in your journal, and that's how you want to go back and clean up your trades when they go poorly, right? So that you can move forward. And what do you want to get to? You want to get back to your process as soon as possible so you don't have the anxiety and you're not trying to read every second of price action. And then visualize. Go through this process here, even if you don't trade CL, right? Go through this process. We were in the zone. We did not rotate into the zone. I don't take this trade, right? If I'm in the zone, it took over an hour. I'm just trying to get flat. First touch of the yellow zone. Good rotation down. I'm long. I come in here. I take the top at 49.10. I take my stop, right? That sucks. But if you don't practice this sequence of no trade, take the trade gets stopped, I take the trade, I get paid, or I get out break even. I don't short in the hole, right? I don't get all geeked up that the market's going to go to zero, and I wait for the rotation. So this thing qualified because of rotation. This did. I take my trade here, and I end up profitable. If you can't stack that vision from beginning to end, and it doesn't matter whether you do it with ES, CL, NQ, whatever you trade, the bonds, if you don't have that vision, right? If you don't have that vision to stack all those together, right? In that process, especially when it's moving fast, especially when there's a little chaos, especially when we can't figure out there's news, right? The only thing I did right today was saying that I would stop when I took those 2 stops back to back. That's about the only thing I executed properly on CL, and it was pretty much all the way around a frowny face day for Simon, except I didn't get bearish and try to make it back up in the hole. I didn't get bearish and try to make it up here and think, oh, we're just going to continue down forever, right? Which I could have. I could have said, oh, 46.68, I'm bearish, I'm going to get crushed, right? And I didn't try to short at the end of the day going, the white zone's got to hold, I'm going to short here, it's got to go back down, right? Those were the things that I did correct. I didn't make a bad situation worse, right? And I'm back on track for tomorrow. Any questions? Okay. You're very welcome, Randy. Your mental approach to the game is everything in this. If you devastate yourself in one day, you overtrade, you lose faith in your process, you let the loss color your eyes so red that you're literally seeing red and you can't, if you see red, you're mad, you're going to trade red. Very few people who trade mad and make money, right? And it's all right to feel like crap, right? That's okay. That's what you feel. It's not okay to take that and turn that into, I've blown up my entire day and week and month, right? It's the beginning of the month. There's a long way to go, right? Now you can say, I don't trade CL. It's too hard. That's all right too. And pre-planning your trades also means not knowing what's not a trade. Exactly, Randy. So I appreciate all y'all joining. I think everyone did pretty well. I didn't really hear from anyone that got, I know a couple people took a stop in this zone. My guess is if you'll go back and resequence like I just did, if you're down or not flat on CL, right? I know Greg actually had a very good day. He flipped this and went short up in here. So, but he's extraordinary at trading CL. But I know a couple people took stops. My question would be, if you took stops, did you do just what I did? Did you take all the sequence all the way through, right, until you hit your max stop loss, right? And if you didn't, why not? You need to find out why, and then you need to go back and restructure the day and what it would look like. It's the last step, and it's very, very important. You cannot leave the day with what you did wrong. You have to leave the day with a clear picture of what it looked like when you did it perfectly. If you don't do that, if you can't do that for yourself, you are asking for your own butt to get kicked. As a side note, for those who are trading this after hours, tonight's the rig count, and it's right at the close. I think it's right at 3 o'clock or 3:15. The rig count comes out, and this thing can fly on that rig count. I would not advise. There's no reason to be trading it in my eyes, but that's my 2 cents on that, right? Unless you're just going to short up here and hope that it just flushes on the rig count, but that's not my trade. So anyways, that's my 2 cents, guys. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I have a coaching session now, so I'm going to kill the room. If anyone has any questions or needs me to cover anything, I'll post this tonight so everyone can review it if they'd like. But remember, we're having the best summer ever. You know, I've been trading for a long time, and this is by far the most consistent we've gotten down to. Ultra clear on where our trade locations are. There's no ambiguity. We've identified where weak traders are trading versus where the institutional traders are trading and helping us out, which is why the white zones are working so solidly, along with the yellow zones. And then we know where to skip. And then if you're more advanced, there's other locations. But, you know, this is the worst time of year. And if you make money this time of year, you know, which we did, we had good June, we had a good July, and I anticipate August will be good. I don't see any reason why that should change. Then we'll continue banging out this P&L, and then when it gets really good in September, I'd expect us to have a good close to the year. So I'm excited. Anyways, talk to you later, guys.